Hi, my name is London Perry, and I'm going to be introducing my group's topic, which is different cultural attitudes towards death. Um, we'll be covering a range of different cultures from specific countries or from broader territories. My country that I'm presenting on is Japan. Japan is a very interesting nation in their cultural attitudes towards death, especially when one considers them in comparison to American attitudes, because both the United States and Japan are post industrialized nations but with different cultural influences. However, like the US, Japan has a very biomedical approach to healthcare and, in consequence, has developed some very secular attitudes towards death. In the four categories that we can kind of understand those in are choice, timing, place, and person. So, choice refers to who is deciding when it's time to let someone die. If someone's sick in a hospital, that's a very important choice, a very important decision, and it's seen as a secular one. Whereas in the United States, where there's a very large Christian influence, um, one might consider that it's God's choice to take someone's life and not their own. So that's an interesting distinction there because Japan has more Buddhist, Shinto, and Confucianist influences in its culture. In timing, it's a question of appropriateness of when it's considered okay to die. Um, Children, it's seen as tragic if a child dies, but if someone's really old and they die, it's seen as timely and appropriate, and it's not seen as a sad thing like it is in the US, where death is kind of understood as kind of like this hopelessness, like inevitability, um, that is never really fully accepted or appreciated. And so then there's the issue of place where someone dies. In Japan, there's a cultural clash happening here because, um, for one, like traditionally, one would want to die in their home surrounded by their family, but with this new biomedical attitude and more contemporary Japanese culture, there are people dying in hospices or by euthanasia or in hospitals, and that kind of brings concerns up for the fourth category, which is person, the intangible self, and what happens to the intangible self after the physical self dies and stops to exist. Um, in Japan, there's this general belief that one dies and becomes an ancestor, or is just generally a spirit. And if they die in a positive environment, like around their family in their home, then you're going to have a benevolent and protective ancestor rather than an angry spirit who died in a hospital alone in a very sterile environment. Um, Something else interesting to note about different attitudes towards death between the US and Japan is the taboo or lack thereof surrounding suicide. In Japan, there were 25,000 suicides in 2015. That's 70 a day. Um, and suicide in Japan is very normalized, and there are a lot of reasons for that. Some are historical practices, um, such as seppuku by the samurai and kamikaze bombers during World War II, where it was seen as honorable to die. And some of those attitudes carry over today, um, when Japan is in a time of economic instability and people are having a hard time supporting themselves, and there's also very lax life insurance policies. So one is seen as supporting their family, um, and doing the honorable thing by killing themselves to support their family so that they can cash in that life insurance. Um, there are also other factors, such as a lack of infrastructure to support those with mental illness and a lot of social isolation that have developed in contemporary Japanese culture. So it's very interesting to kind of compare the United States perspective towards death, which is very Christian in its attitudes, suicide's a sin, um, and death is kind of seen as like a separation from the physical realm. Whereas in Japan, there are different attitudes. Suicide is acceptable. Um, One isn't necessarily gone entirely when they die, and there are different ways to die with dignity and peacefully, um, based on those different cultural attitudes. Um, it's very interesting for me as an existential agnostic to kind of see where I fall in between the two cultures, personally, I don't see suicide as a sin, um, but I also don't see it as an act that was used to support or help others. It's like an independent act, which I think is the American influence. Um, in my own personal thoughts surrounding that. Thank you for your time.
So, I'm going to be talking about Tibetan death practices and their conceptualization of death. In Tibetan death practices, the common funeral conceptualization is called a sky burial. There are a few reasons why they have sky burials as opposed to any other type of burial. One of them is to symbolize the impermanence of life. By leaving a corpse at the top of a mountain, they're symbolizing generosity because they can give back to life that is already existing, as well as practical purposes because the ground in Tibet is too hard to be dug, and just a ground burial wouldn't be feasible at all. Sky burials are practiced in Tibet, Mongolia, Nepal, and Bhutan, among other places, but they're usually practiced by a certain sect of Buddhism. So not all Buddhists practice this, but the Buddhists that are located in those general places do. The setting is always usually a high place, a high mountaintop, and they lay them on a long, flat rock. The procedure goes that there's a monk present, and he regulates mantras and burning of incense, as well as cutting the body up. I didn't figure out why they exactly cut the body up, but that's one of the things that they do, perhaps to just make it easier for the vultures to eat. Only close family is present, just kind of like how our funeral practices would be. And the whole practice is carried on in a very lighthearted way with jokes to help the spirit move on and not to make it any kind of grave or dramatic process. And then the body is just left to be eaten by vultures. In contrast with the West, a lot of people think that this is kind of a barbaric practice, but really it isn't that far from our line of thinking, which is really just to give peace to the person that was living and make sure they move on to the next life peacefully. This also relates back to the chapter on Maasai culture. Maasai culture also believes this basic giving back to life through the decomposition of a body. They write that they want to let their bones go back to the earth so they can be used to prepare for land for future life. So it's all a process of generosity and peace and isn't so much barbaric at all.
Within Irish culture, like two major influencing factors when it comes to the perceptions of death. One is the ancient pagan side, which still holds influence today, and the other is the Catholic side, which, while more contemporary, also holds major roots within Ireland's culture. On the pagan side, and in pre-Christian Irish culture, we still see that there are wakes that are held for several days, where people dance, sing, eat food, and tell stories, and generally celebrate the life of the person who died. Within Catholic culture and Catholic death rites and practices and perceptions, it's perhaps a bit more pious and a bit more strict in what needs to be done to a body, what rites and sacraments need to be performed on the body. And so, because of this, we can see how the two parts of this culture kind of come at ends at times. However, Ireland as a society has kind of met in the middle in a few ways, where there is the act of going to the mass versus going to the house, and some people can go to one and not go to the other, and then depending on how well you know the family, you might go to one and not the other, and generally it is considered more of a social affair, maybe, where a lot of people would come versus just very close family members. It's almost more of a community event than just a family event. So to summarize, while they do seem to have a perception of death that is maybe not as harsh or as deterministic as some societies may have, I believe that it may also just be a form of coping, a way of realizing that death is an inevitable factor within all of our lives, and that we will all be influenced by death. And rather than choose to be hurt by it and choose to wallow in it and choose to dwell on it, they choose to celebrate not only the lives of the people, or the person who died, but their own lives. And they do that by celebrating and by being together and being as happy as they can be in such a time.
Hello, my name is Jacob Roca, and I will be presenting on how death is conceptualized in the Hispanic culture. When a family member dies in the Hispanic society, there are 3 stages in which the family of the deceased will go through. We will be concentrating on dealing with a terminally ill family member, holding a wake, and finally, the burial. Religious values are very important in a Hispanic culture. The majority of Hispanics are Christian Catholics or Christian Protestants. Therefore, when a family member passes away, the religious values of the culture are seen throughout the process of death. While dealing with a terminally ill family member, the female relatives spend the most time caring for the sick. In a society where women are beginning to make a name for themselves, they are still in charge of caring for the sick in a household. If the sick has an incurable disease and is waiting to pass away, this person will usually spend their last days at home instead of a hospital, with the whole purpose being to spending the last days of their lives with their last ones. It is expected for the people of this culture to be brave and strong in front of the sick. They cannot break down, while this, in their presence, it is looked down upon. Religion plays a major role while dealing with a terminally ill person. The patient's and family's faith in God may interfere with the patient's agreeing to comfort measures, such as pain medications, that might make him or her feel more comfortable. Finally, right before the patient is about to pass away, a local priest or pastor will be beside them on their deathbed and are given last rites by a priest or pastor and are anointed with holy oil for this purpose. It is the individual is Catholic, the priest hears the dying person's confession and offers absolution. If the individual is Protestant, the pastor will have a final prayer with them and ask for forgiveness in front of God. With the patient, when able, they receive communion and a blessing from the priest or pastor. In Hispanic culture, holding a wake may be much different than in other cultures. Once the individual has moved on and their bodies have been prepared, the family will hold a wake. The Hispanic wake is more of a social event. During this time, friends and family members share memories of the deceased. Food is served during the wake, and some attendees play cards or dominoes. Conversation turns to remembering good times, and laughter is part of the occasion. Flowers and candles will be placed in the room where the visitation is being held. Sometimes the wake can last up to 5 days, as friends and family members of the deceased have traveled from different parts of the country where transportation is limited to attend the wake. In a Catholic Hispanic household, the funeral process will likely include a mass held in a church. The casket carrying the deceased is transported to the location, and close family members take part in a processional as it is moved close to the altar. Open expressions of grief are acceptable for females in this culture. However, for men, breaking down after a death is not the norm. They are expected to be strong and keep their emotions from showing, as they have to support and be the comfort for their loved ones. According to beliefs in this culture, the dead return on certain days of the year and are remembered through special events. The body must be buried for this to occur, as cremation is not a common option in the Hispanic culture. The last event that occurs during a burial is friends and extended family members commonly accompany the immediate family to the cemetery for the burial. Afterward, the mourners gather for a meal and reception. This time is for comforting those who are dealing with their grief and to share stories about the deceased. As I had mentioned before, Religion plays a major role in the Hispanic culture. Hispanics, the majority being Christians, believe that there is an afterlife, a place where the individual will go either to heaven or hell. Therefore, many Hispanics try to live their life with doing good deeds and helping others to one day, hopefully, end up in heaven. Thank you.
I want to discuss about the deaf in Latin America. I come from a Christian family, and the way we do over there is when somebody dies, we clean the person. We take like 2 3 hours to do everything to set up, put the clothes, everything to the person, and it's ready for the morning, which we do the same day. Usually, the whole night we keep the body, and the next days we bury it. We don't keep it longer than 2 days, probably because we don't use any preservations, and we don't do any death certificate. We don't wait that. So that we do after the body is already buried. Um, the culture the culture has to be a lot. I have seen like different parts in Latin America. They do different way. Some people keep for 2 days. Some other people do 3 days. But mostly, I have seen like the next day when they bury the person. And the people are really helpful with somebody dies. They try to help you with money. Make sure you have all these resources in order to pay the funeral. To pick up the body from the funeral. Um, all this cause and people they try not to leave you alone. Make sure you're gonna be surrounded by nice people. Everything that, even though if you had problems with that person before, when somebody dies, everything they just become like again friends. I think this is really nice for me to see how they help. Um, and funeral, what they do, they rather wanna do on their house than doing in the funeral house. I think the price is extremely expensive. Again, that reflects in the poverty. Most people cannot afford to take it to the funeral house or morgue, and they just do it home. Other than that, I haven't seen a lot of different things than American, except here, when somebody dies, you don't know how long they're gonna keep you at the morgue. Can be a week, can be 2 weeks, depends how long it's gonna take the death of certificate. Um, but also I can say, I mean, we're mostly, I would say like 90% of people Christians in Latin America. So it looks like to me everything's similar, the way they bury the person, except if you live in different place. I feel like that's more cultural than how they bury the person, because some of the places the weather doesn't help, so that can be a problem. But in terms of the way they bury the person is similar, exactly the same. I heard about these other people how they do. They keep like 2 3 days. The body, to me it just doesn't. Well, to me it just doesn't make sense. I don't know the reason why they want to keep longer. If they can do everything the same day, of course I understand if they have family or America, Europe, they need to. They at least want to see their loved one. So that's the reason they keep longer. Uh, but the death body um, just they body right away. Um, the place, at least where I'm from, they don't keep more than 2 days. And the other reason probably they don't want to keep more than 2 days is the cost. Like if more than 2 days is gonna cost more money to the person who's in charge. because they have to give food to everyone, breakfast, dinner, and they have to provide the transportation as well as um, they have to pay pretty much everything. So the longer you keep, the more expensive it's gonna cost you. So most people, they just wanna give rid of the person, just bury it, of course, and they do. They remember after the death, 6 days later they do a short ceremony again where they remember everything, and they do another 3 months, remember the about the deaf person. As well, they do the 9 months and the 12 month, and that's it. That's pretty much they do. But usually now, what is changing is they just do the 6 days ceremony where they remember about the person, how good was the person life, what did it. But usually people say, "Oh, this person was the greatest person." Only they talk mostly positive things, not negative things, which they do same thing on 6 months and 9 months. Now people, they don't want to spend that much money, and they just trying to do 2 or 3 instead doing like 4, which that's how it's supposed to be. Um, yeah, it's just sad, just to see how people are after the death. I mean, I can't even understand how my grandma was after my grandfather died. Um, she said she's gonna die as well because she couldn't even see herself without him, and it was extremely hard for us as well. I think that was one of the biggest impact for us to move America, and because he was helping pretty much the whole family. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. Thank you.
Hello everyone, in my part of this project I will discuss different funeral traditions in Europe, and for this I invited some of foreigners from Europe to talk with us about their cultural funeral traditions.
Hello, I'm Yana and I'm from Ukraine. In my country, when a person dies, we usually follow the body to the cemetery, and we usually sing some celebrative songs. The priest usually take a mass, and then we bury the body. Afterwards, there's usually a banquet in honor of the death, and after a year, we repeat the banquet to remember him.
Yeah, I'm from Sweden. In my culture, when someone passes away, we usually have a funeral 1 or 2 weeks after. If it is an older person, they usually have decided before they die how they want the funeral to be, if they want to be criminalized or burn and spread somewhere. And if it is a younger person and they haven't decided it yet, the near relatives decided for them. The ceremony is often like 1 or 2 hours, and is often in church, and people has to wear black. And after the ceremony, during the ceremony, the priest often speaks about the person, or relatives speak about like some few words about them. And there's often songs that is connected to the person who died. And after the ceremony, they usually have a meal where they have people just eat and gathered and talk about the family and relatives.
My name is Anna. I'm from Denmark. When someone dies in Denmark, the funeral takes place 8 days after the death. Usually it will be a cremation or a burial. The ceremony would usually take place in the church, and a priest or a relative will say some words. It depends on how personal the funeral will be. Afterwards, the coffin or the urn, it depends on if the body is burned, will be carried out to the cemetery, and then there will be a ceremony where the coffin or the urn will be buried in the ground. And usually the families or friends will gather around the grave, and they will wear usually black clothes and stuff. And afterwards, the relatives will make a nice deal usually, and friends will come and celebrate the great memory of the beloved one.